familiar names and faces, and also some new ones. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box so we know who's joining today. You can type your name, your organization, and the location where you're at the moment. So today's event is a Tools and Solutions webinar. And today we will be talking and exploring an online tool for landscape sustainability performance monitoring called LandScale. This tool has been co-developed by Conservation International and the Rainforest Alliance. And today's event is organized through the Food and Agricultural Commodity Systems community, the FACS community, and is delivered as part of the Food Systems Land Use and Restoration Impact Program. Today's event will be facilitated by Niels Haak, who is the Sustainable Coffee Partnerships Director at Conservation International. And before handing over to Niels and colleagues from Conservation International, I will present briefly the agenda of today. So firstly, colleagues from CI will set the scene on landscape monitoring and will talk about the need of alignment around monitoring tools for landscape initiatives. And will tell us a bit more about CI's role in developing LandScale. Afterwards, we will basically do a deep dive into the tool. So you'll learn more about the tool itself, its core components, and how it was developed, including its usage. Afterwards, we will have a small presentation of the application of this tool in a specific context. So this will be in the case of Mali. Afterwards, we will move to the question and answers session, but please do feel free throughout the presentations. If any questions come up, just feel free to post them in the chat box. And after that, we will close the event and I will mention a couple of things about events that are coming up as part of the Food and Agricultural Commodity Systems community. So with this and without further ado, I welcome you, Niels. Niels is joining us from the Netherlands, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. I'm also joining you with a little bit of a cough, so apologies in advance for that. It's a pleasure to host this session. Everyone, so welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. It's great to see such a big attendance and interest in this session. As Alexandra mentioned, I am Director of Sustainable Coffee Partnerships at Conservation International. So you may think, why is someone working on coffee now talking about LandScale and landscape approaches? Well, within our coffee program, we increasingly shift our focus from supply chains to landscape approaches, recognizing and acknowledging that some of the issues and challenges facing the sector need to be addressed at the landscape level rather than only at this farm level or within individual supply chains to overcome that. And we work a lot in multi-stakeholder initiatives like the Sustainable Coffee Challenge that we lead, or through the International Coffee Organization's Public-Private Task Force to stimulate that multi-stakeholder dialogue around landscape approaches and the value they bring to the sector. So before we dive into today's topic, and why also within Coffee we increasingly look at tools like LandScale to explore how can we measure and monitor progress over time and in specific landscapes. We wanted to actually hear from you as participants to see kind of how up to speed everyone is with the topic we're talking about today. And we wanted to do that by launching a couple of poll questions to get that sense. So we're using Menti for that. So if you're not familiar, please go to menti.com. There's a code in the chat. There you go, 1816551, or use that direct link. Frederica is going to switch to that. So you should, if you're there, you should see the first questions come up. Frederica, can we switch to that? There you go. Great. Thanks so much. So the first question basically, is your organization currently monitoring at the landscape scale? All right. Answers coming in. It's great that everyone is able to find the Menti poll. All right. So it looks like we have a fair share of experts in the room who are already looking at the landscape level monitoring. But also some really new to this, so eager to learn on what it is all about. All right, still coming in. So we have a packed agenda, so I'm going to quickly run through these. We have 35 in, so that's pretty representative of our group today. But I encourage everyone else to keep answering. If we move to our next question, so those that are familiar with landscape level monitoring, which tools are you currently using? And it's an open-ended question, so you can just type in the name of the tool that you've been using. Let's see. And while LandScale is the preferred answer, obviously it's definitely not the only answer. Really, just any tool that you're familiar with or that you've been using, please let us know. Good to
Niels, it's telling me the voting is closed.
Yeah, the voting's closed.
I think, thank you very much. I think now is open. Can you vote? I can see some answering, but thank you very much.
This is super useful. Thanks for answering. I see a lot of familiar tools come up, SourceUp coming up, the IDA-led initiative, but also quite a lot of remote sensing references, which is included in many of these tools as well. Remote sensing, good. I think also a question on good to get back to, like, to what extent is remote sensing included within LandScale that we can get back to. Exact, Global Forest Watch, the exact tool. That's great. All right, let's leave it with that. 21, we had about 19-20 people respond that they are already using that, so that's almost all. So thanks a lot for that input. One last question for those on the call, how familiar are you with LandScale as a tool? There you go. That's great. So it looks like a majority of people are really here to learn what is LandScale all about and how can I use this. Filling in some blanks, but at least not a lot of people who are very familiar with it. So that's really great and will help, especially Arturo later on, to kind of tailor his presentation. All right. In interest of time, we'll move on. So to kick us off, and thanks again everyone for contributing to the Menti questions. To kick us off today, I invited my colleague John Buchanan to share some reflections with us. John Buchanan is Vice President Sustainable Production within Conservation International Center for Sustainable Lands and Waters. In his role, he works closely with leading companies in the food, retail, and agribusiness sectors to develop and implement sustainable agricultural strategies which link commodity supply chains to agricultural landscape and jurisdictional initiatives. John, I'm going to pass it to you. Conservation International, as Alexandra already mentioned, has been closely involved in the development of LandScale. Can you provide some of your perspective on why there's a need to align monitoring tools for landscape initiatives and why CI stepped into developing LandScale?
Absolutely. Thanks, Niels, and thanks to the team for putting this together, and to all of you who have joined today. And I think that those Menti slides you went through were really helpful. And what I take from that is that we have a lot of people on the call who are familiar with and implementing landscape approaches, which is terrific, but maybe less familiar with LandScale. And so again, a great setup for today's session. But to your question, and given that we have a good number of practitioners who already understand the landscape approaches, I won't go a whole lot into the background and the rationale for the landscape approach in general, because it sounds like most people probably understand that importance. But just at a very brief high level, it's really recognizing that if we are going to achieve lasting and sustainable outcomes, be it conservation, economic development, or other, that we really need to be taking these integrated approaches. And the challenges of achieving lasting conservation objectives if, for example, we are not also addressing livelihoods or economic needs, or the challenges of sustaining improvements in well-being or livelihoods development if those are undermined by declining environmental health or water problems or climate change. And so again, the importance, if we're going to achieve sustainable outcomes in any of these objectives, the need to look at these integrated landscape approaches. And of course, the challenge with that is that those integrated landscape approaches can be very complex. There's lots of moving pieces. There's lots of different initiatives and partners, some working on governance issues, some maybe working on those social or livelihoods or land tenure issues, others working on conservation or restoration initiatives. And that can be very complex. And what's really important is that, we don't, and that complexity also means lots of different initiatives and partners doing different lines of work. And what's important is that we be able to understand and have a tool to understand, are those different initiatives collectively having the impact that we want to see in that landscape? Are the trends moving in the right direction? And I sometimes think about the monitoring tools and LandScale as like a dashboard on a car. And on your car, you have one dial with a needle that shows how fast you're going. You have another one that shows engine RPMs. You have another one that shows temperature, and that's the type of tool we need for landscapes as well, is to understand, is human well-being getting better or is it getting worse? Is economic development going up, going down? What's happening? Is conservation and environmental health getting better? And those are the tools we need. We need to understand those trends and those changes if we are to have evidence-based decision-making, if we're to have science-based strategies, and if we're going to be able to adapt our strategies based on what's happening in the landscapes. And of course, it's all the more important to have those tools to understand the change and the trend lines in those landscapes if we're asking companies and donors and private sector to invest. We need to be able to show that indeed we're making progress, we're having collective impact, and that again, things are hopefully improving, but at the very least we understand if they're not, so that we can adapt and adjust our strategies as needed. And CI has been working in the space around monitoring tools and understanding change in the landscape for quite some time, and probably one of our first big efforts goes back about a decade with a tool called the Landscape Accounting Framework, which was developed in-house by a team of CI staff. And it was a great tool and had many similarities to LandScale. However, it was developed in-house, and the real value in LandScale is that it has been developed through a multi-stakeholder process, bringing in a range of experts around the world to give input into the LandScale tool. And LandScale has been explicitly developed with the purpose of enabling others to use it and apply it. And that's also super important, because given the complexity of landscape initiatives, if all the different actors and practitioners around the world are developing their own monitoring systems, that becomes very complex for donors and for private sector and for others to understand, are they really working or not? If they have to learn a new monitoring system to understand if their impacts are having, if their investments are having the impact that they want, it's going to make it much harder for us to build the scale of investment that we need to drive landscape transformation at scale across the world. And so having that standardized approach, developed a range of experts and the tools and resources available to support implementation of the tool, that's really what got CI excited about LandScale and why we've joined wholeheartedly as a partner in supporting the development and now the rollout of the tool. So I think maybe I'll stop there, Neil, and again, turn it back to you and over to Arturo.
Thanks, John. Very much like the analogy with the car speedometer and also the alignment, the point around alignment and having a clear message to public donors, to industry players across the board. So appreciate your reflections. So getting into the meat of it, I'm going to turn it to our speaker from Rainforest Alliance, from their LandScale team, Arturo, to dive in the LandScale tool a little bit more. Arturo is business development and innovation manager at LandScale, or at Rainforest Alliance, within their LandScale team, where he promotes the use of the platform in diverse landscapes, help build partnerships with relevant stakeholders, and explores different ways to drive financial resources into landscape projects. He has a background in commercial strategy and relationship management, with more than 10 years of experience in various sectors, including banking, education, and F&B. Arturo, I think everyone is very keen to hear what you have to share with us today, so I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you, Niels. Thank you, and I also thank you, John, for the amazing introduction. I think it will make it a lot easier for me. So yeah, I mean, we can jump right into it. If you can go to the next slide. I mean, some of these John already introduced. So yeah, like he mentioned, Rainforest Alliance and Conservation International are part of our steering group. All of the team members sit within Rainforest Alliance, but Conservation International is still part of the big decisions on the tool, on the platform, on the business model. And here you can see also some of the founding partners that we had during the process that John also mentioned. So we were receiving input and feedback from these organizations when we developed the framework and when we were developing the tool, the platform itself. So the idea is that we had the most useful information to make a reliable but also consistent tool for different organizations to use in different landscapes. So we were receiving feedback on what kind of indicators we should include, what kind of metrics, how we should structure the workflow that I will show you next. And yeah, I mean, this was done during a piloting process of, I think it was over 3 years, and we finally launched the platform last year in April. So we are up and running, and yeah, maybe if you can jump to the next slide. Thank you. So like John mentioned, the final goal of LandScale and the objective of developing this tool was to facilitate monitoring for different kinds of organizations. Landscape approach is not easy, like John mentioned, so we wanted to provide something that could be useful and make it easier to do this kind of work and to be able to monitor impacts in a reliable and also consistent way. So of course, the tool allows the user to identify risks and opportunities at the landscape level by creating a reliable baseline that you are then able to compare across time. The idea is to do it in a holistic way. Like I really like that analogy that John made as well with the car and the different indicators that you should be looking at, and not only the speed or not only the gas. You should be looking at everything to see how it's changing. So definitely identifying risks and opportunities is one of the benefits that we see from using the tool. But not only that, but also convening stakeholders. Once you are using a single tool and have a single baseline, you can parts from the same place and be able to connect in an easier way with local community, local companies, governments, other NGOs, and of course be able to connect to incentives. So once you have this reliable information in place and consistent information, it's easier to communicate and report to donors or to investors or to governments. So that's the general idea of behind LandScale. And maybe in the next slide, thank you. We have some of our pilots and users that are working with LandScale already. As you can see, most of them are in the Global South, actually all of them, except for one pilot that we had in Ireland. So yeah, some of these were pilots, some of these are actual users. A lot of these are NGOs who are already working at the landscape level, so they already have their relationship with the local stakeholders, and they are using it to, yeah, as I mentioned, to communicate in a better way, in a more consistent way. But there's also use cases, and you will hear it later from one of them, actually from SMV, from Maimuna, who will be presenting the specific case in Mali, who are investors, are interested in investing in a landscape. You also have some participation by project developers or by private companies interested at this scale. So yeah, I mean, usually, just to mention that, I think I'm gonna mention it later on, but what we define as landscape, because sometimes it's a different definition, is either by watershed or by jurisdiction. We suggest it is done this way, but the tool allows to create a customized boundary anyway, depending on the priorities of each project. So maybe the next one, please. So yeah, now, after that introduction, let's jump right into it. So what is LandScale? So it's divided into 3 main components. We have a framework that we developed, as I mentioned before, with the help of a lot of partner organizations, while getting, we were trying to get the most relevant indicators and metrics and how we should kind of categorize them. Then we have a validation mechanism, and we have the online platform. I'm going to start showing you the assessment framework in a high level picture. So maybe in the next slide, please. This is the high level assessment framework. If you want to look at the specific framework, you can find it in our website, or you can just send me an email and I'm happy to send it to you. So yeah, basically we have it, as John mentioned, it's the idea is to have it in a holistic way. So we have the 4 pillars: ecosystems, human well-being, governance, and production, with a lot of indicators under it. Of course, we have a lot of specific metrics under each of these indicators, and you can see that more in detail. You can see we have some core indicators, some landscape dependent, and some optional ones. The idea is that it's as complete as possible to make it as robust as possible and more reliable. But of course, it will depend on the landscape. As I mentioned before, the idea is to make it more consistent, not necessarily standardized, because it's not going to be maybe the same metrics that will be used for one landscape or for the other, or the same data sources. But the idea is to have it in one same structure, in one single place, and in an easy to use platform. It's also worth mentioning here that this is super flexible. The platform is really flexible. So in case there is a metric that is not included in our framework, the platform allows to include it in there, or even include a fifth pillar if that's the case. If that's in the end, you're going to come out with a nice looking report, and it's going to come out structured in this way. But you can also play around with it a little bit to adjust to your organization's needs. Wait, in the next slide, please. So jumping into the validation mechanism, of course, the idea, we created a workflow for this to make it kind of more easy for organizations to work with the tool. And after we developed 5 steps, which I'm going to show in the next slide, please. So we developed this workflow with 5 steps, and after each step, there is a validation piece, a validation mechanism by the LandScale team, in which there is an operations team that makes sure that the guidelines were being followed for the specific step, that everything is going according to our guidelines, and then that further on the assessment, that the landscape data, that the data sources are reliable, that the methodologies used make sense. So all of this is done to have a more accurate and reliable report in the end. Just going briefly to it, step number 1 is about the preparation. So it's about recruiting the assessment team who will be conducting the assessment and inputting all of the information into the platform. We have a series of terms of reference of what an assessment team should look like, what kind of expertise you should have. In this step, you also set the goals of the landscape. Then step number 2 is about selecting the boundary. As I mentioned before, we recommend that it is done by watershed or by jurisdiction to capture the most impact. Usually we are looking at boundaries of at least 10,000 hectares, but sometimes it's way bigger than that. It will depend on the priorities of the landscape itself. So, but this is flexible, so it can adapt to whatever the organization's needs are. Then step number 3 is about selecting the indicators and metrics. We provide the comprehensive list of indicators and metrics, and in this stage, the organization, the assessment team, will have to select the ones that are relevant, and the ones that are required but are impossible to get or will not be included. It needs to be justified. I mean, in order to, it's in the end, it needs to be transparent. So it's a nice way also to capture this in this part of the process. So in the end, in the report, if you want to disclose in a more transparent way, you can do so and say which metrics were not included and the reason behind that. That's the step for that. Step number 4 is about actually inputting all of the data, getting all of the data sets, and generating the results. So we are data set agnostic. We do recommend a series of metrics, of course, and we have a data source library that we provide with advantages and disadvantages of using different data sources. But in the end, the user can use whatever data that they have at hand or they find relevant. Of course, we will validate this in the end, that it is reliable and that it comes from a reliable place. And yeah, after this step, there is a second validation piece. And then before jumping into that one, just to talk a little bit about step number 5, this is just generating the report. So basically, you will get the input that the team has been working on in the 4 previous steps. You will get kind of an automatic report, but you can also play with it a little bit and see what indicators you want to include, or if you want to include some additional graphics or pictures, or take something out or edit it. So step number 5 is just about building out the final report. And yeah, next slide, please. So this is the validation part. As I mentioned before, there is a validation piece by the LandScale team. So this is validation number 1 here. So basically, the team will be making sure that the assessment follows the guidelines and the quality of the results is good. But we also have, after step number 4, a piece we call local reviewers. So we require the assessment team to select at least 1 local reviewer per metric. So let's say this can be 1 expert who will be reviewing the ecosystems pillar or the human well-being pillar. They need to be approved by the LandScale team. They need to be, of course, experts in the subject matter. They have to know about the landscape, and they need to be independent from the assessment team to avoid conflicts of interest. And after that's approved, they basically have to answer 2 questions: if the data is suitable and if the results actually reflect the conditions in the landscape. And if that is right, if there is not comments, or if the comments have been addressed, the results, the assessment gets validated and the results can be published. So this is basically how the workflow and the validation mechanism works. If you can jump to the next one, please. Jumping into the platform, I mean, this one, it's kind of, I'm going to try to capture as much as I can here, but of course, I'm happy to run a demo if anyone is interested in getting to know the platform further. The idea behind the platform, of course, is, as everything else, is to guide the user step by step and to make it easier for assessment teams to conduct the assessment. So I'm going to show you just one brief screen capture. Thank you with some of the features that we have. This is one screen capture actually of one assessment. So as you can see on the top over there, you have the 5 steps. This is the workflow that I showed you before. So you can click on it. Of course, you can jump right into each of the steps, and then under the on the bottom here, there is of course, there's an element that works for project and task management. So in this specific example is on the step number 1. So you have the different tasks that relate to this step. And here you have who is assigned to these tasks. So you can assign a team member to do this activity, and then you can keep track of what's the status on it. And also what's the task type. So if it's a required task or if it's an optional task. So it's an easy way to see where the assessment is at the moment. Of course, there is an assessment lead, we call it. So he acts as a project manager, and then this is the person responsible to assign tasks to the different team members. There is no limit to the number of users that an assessment team can have. Usually, it's around 5, 6, 7 members, but it can be more. So yeah, it makes it easier to kind of follow up on where the assessment is at. And then, of course, here on the right, you also have some guidance, support, and useful tools. So, for example, you have some interactive videos. You also have the data resources library. You have, of course, technical support. You can schedule a meeting with the operations team members to further discuss or to have a Q&A session. You have the guidelines, of course, for each step, the detailed guidelines, and some other features. But those are the main ones. And the idea is to make it, of course, always easier for the user. If you can just jump to the next one. This is just to show you a little bit, like I mentioned before, the final output at this moment is creating a landscape profile and then creating a report. These reports can be shown into the platform. And then, of course, we have 2 sides of the platform. We have the assessment users, and then you will also have, of course, the something that we call the results consumer. So talking about the results consumer, we think about investors or donors or government or anyone interested in looking at what's happening in that landscape. That kind of user will be able to scroll through the landscape, and actually you can create a free user under these characteristics. I will encourage you to go over it and maybe explore the platform a little bit. And at the moment, I would like to mention this as well, because we have the report. Maybe if you jump to the next slide. So the report, I'm just going to show a couple of screenshots because it's really difficult to show a whole report, but you can check it in the platform anyway. And yeah, I mean, in general, it will show what metrics, what indicators, and what specific metrics were assessed, were included in the framework, in the assessment, sorry. And then it will showcase like in that order, and you will get the inputs that the assessment team has put it into there with the graphs or the pictures that were input into the platform. And then if you can jump to the next one, just to show a little brief example of how it looks like. So for example, these are indicators on protection of natural ecosystems or water quantity, and you have the graphs that were input into the platform and some general description. But of course, we're also working, and I wanted to mention this, we're also working on a more dynamic dashboard to complement the reports. So you can pick specific indicators and metrics and be able to, okay, I want to look at water indicators for X landscape, and you can actually select only that, or maybe water and education indicators, and you can select that and look at it in a more dynamic way. And that's something that should come out later this month. Maybe just to wrap up, if of who is LandScale for, of course, you want to understand sustainability at the landscape scale and in a holistic way. Like it has been mentioned, you want to monitor sustainability outcomes in a consistent and reliable way. I think that comes with the workflow and the platform, and also with the validation to give it the reliability. You have access. I mean, this is a preferred buy, but you can also start by do it in parallel. But it's good if you already have access to local knowledge and landscape stakeholders, because it will make easier getting all of the information to input into the platform. And then, of course, is the purpose of this landscape approach. And then you can also embed human resources into conducting the assessments. I mean, this will require some time and resources to complete. So it's important that the organization is ready for this and that they have the right projections, and they put it into the initial budget. As I mentioned before, the landscape is at least 10,000 hectares. Of course, this will be depending on the specific projects. It can be way bigger than this, but the idea is that it's to capture landscape level. So we don't recommend it for smaller areas. And I think, just the next slide, just to wrap up. Here is here is my email. Please feel free to contact me if you want to explore the tool further and to get more information. There is the website, the platform as well. And we also, I would like to, in our website, we also have this grant proposal toolkit, which may be useful at some point because it has some more information. And also you may use it, to include LandScale in one of your grants if you would like to use it as a monitoring system. So it might come in handy. So thank you again I think I'm in time. So thank you, Niels.
Thanks so much. To a lot of information wrapped into a short amount of time for sure, but thanks for that very clear presentation and overview of LandScale. As CI, we've been using LandScale now in a variety of landscapes, either leading or supporting the assessment, and it's a great experience, and it's a great amount of support from the LandScale team. So kudos to our 2S team. Instead of highlighting a place where CI has used LandScale, we decided to ask for another partner to share their story and on how they have used LandScale. So I want to turn to our colleagues from SNV, Maimouna. Maimouna is a climate change advisor at SNV under the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. She has more than a decade of experience in development related to asset creation, livelihood improvement of communities. And in the past 10 years, she had held several positions on different projects and programs on the resilience and adaptation to climate change in different organizations. And I was quite impressed by the list of organizations, including UNDP, the Red Cross, GIZ, the World Food Programme, and now with SNV. Maimouna holds a master's degree in climate change and sustainable development. And she joins us from Mali today to give an example and speak to how they've used LandScale in their program. So hopefully, Maimouna, if you can unmute and hear us.
Hello, thank you, Niels. Can you hear me all?
Yes, we can hear you well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Niels. Good morning, everybody. As Niels said, I'm Maimouna Karim Sanogo, and I'm working as a climate change advisor at SNV on DFCD project. DFCD is the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. And it's a pleasure for me to share this experience of the landscape assessment that we conducted in Mali, and I hope that will interest you also. Next. The evaluation was initiated by the Netherlands Development Organization through the DFCD project, and DFCD is managed by a consortium composed of the Climate Fund Manager, the Worldwide Fund for Nature Netherlands, and the Netherlands Development Organization. And this consortium is led by the Dutch Entrepreneurial Development Bank. Through this fund, the DFCD support the private sector for high impact projects, mainly based on climate change adaptation or mitigation in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. This fund aims to leverage climate resilient economic growth at scale in developing countries. So we initiated this evaluation because the FCD is seeking to improve community well-being and natural ecosystem for a climate resilient economy. For that, we must know the real situation of and focus the result targeted. Then the landscape assessment must allow us to focus on companies that integrate the real needs of vulnerable communities into their proposals. And the objective of this assessment in Mali is to develop the Mali landscape narrative, which will provide information about several problems and economic issues in the landscape to help build a potential businesses. Next. So considering this sustainability context, we embarked on a collaborative effort together with Rainforest Alliance to pilot this assessment in Mali through a LandScale system. The assessment system is structured through a platform, as you have seen right now in the last presentation. And the baseline assessment framework is SDG. This means that the assessment indicators are linked to SDGs. And it's structured in 5 successive steps. As you have seen already, I don't want to repeat the presentation, which is right now done, but know that the several steps have been followed by the team. Also in Mali, the preparation, which is based in the initial work of selecting and composing a landscape assessment team, and also the monitoring of the landscape context, the boundary with which we define the area for the assessment, and also the matrix selection and indicator. And at the end, we work on the report. Right now, we are in this process. We are finalizing the report. We already sent the first draft to Rainforest, and now they are in observation process with these reports. And the evaluation is being conducted under the supervision of Rainforest, which is responsible for training the team and monitoring activities on the platform, and validating also the various steps. To carry out this work, we have hired 2 consultants, an environmentalist as well as a GIS and data management specialist with a good expertise in data analysis, and a sociologist with expertise in data analysis also. The assessment team received 5 successive training sessions based on the 5 steps of the assessment, so that we could work on the platform. Next. We have chosen the landscape of the Upper Niger in southern Mali between the region of Sikasso and Koulikoro. This landscape is drained by the Niger River and its main tributary, the Bani River. The climate in this landscape is tropical and humid with rainfall between 1,000 and 200 millimeter to 800 millimeter annually. This landscape is a vital biodiversity reserve of Mali, and the area also contributes to the national economy through agriculture, forest activities, and mining. The landscape has been defined according to the following criteria, as you can see in this matrix, linked to the vulnerability aspect, ecological, economic, and safety factors. Next. So the evaluation was conducted on 4 pillars: ecosystem, production, human well-being, and governance. And during the evaluation process in total, 29 indicators were shared between 4 pillars and covering 49 metrics that were used to measure the indicators. Some of the metrics could not be correctly evaluated because of the lack of information and data. Of the 29 indicators, we have only analyzed 13 due to the lack of data, but the 13 that were analyzed help us understand the current environmental situation of the landscape. Next. Next. Okay, here this map show one of the interesting evaluation results, which is the land use and land cover in the landscape. One aspect of the land use and land cover is their temporal change of variation. And through time, the types of dedication of the land can change. In this landscape, the cropland, the bare soil, the woodland, water, and the build up are the most common land dedication. Sorry, you have to come back. Yes, I'm still on this map. Then through this map, we can see that between 2000 and 2020, we can observe an increase in the cultivated area, a decrease in the vegetation area, and an increase in the bare soil and the brown area. This progressive temporal change is explained by the demographic expansion and accentuated by the impact of climate change, and thus lead to anarchic pressure on the environment. So between 2000 and 2020, 24,462 hectares were degraded. This is equivalent to 1,000 and 2,023 hectares degraded per year. So there was no landscape restoration action were observed in the landscape during the observation time frame. Next. Then has lesson learned. When you look at the landscape evaluation framework, you can see how each metric is linked to the indicated SDGs. This is important for an organization which is aimed to base activities in sustainability. And also the tool offer many indicators and metrics to the evaluator and allow us to create order, which facilitates the formulation and identification of the indicator in the landscape linked to the context of the specific landscape. So as this assessment is a referential analysis based on existing data, it's important to ensure that the data is available when identifying the metrics. Also, the digital structuring of the evaluation step on the platform allow a better organization of the process, and the back office analysis done by Rainforest office give a certain assurance on the quality of the information collected. So the metric result will be used in the landscape profile and accessible to the platform user. The landscape profile is therefore a communication tool that we can use to briefly present the main result of our work to the public. Then you can share also this link of the landscape profile. And at last, I can say that during the process, we had difficulties due to the lack of data, and which means that we were not able to fill in all the indicator expected. And also we had some technical difficulty related to the handling of the platform. This is all for me, and I would like to thank you all for invitation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maimouna. Very, very insightful, and very much resonates with some of the learnings that we've had in applying LandScale, and especially some of the lessons learned that you shared resonate a lot. So I think that's important for anyone on the call here who is considering using this, that it's on the one hand quite an endeavor, quite an undertaking, and definitely requires resources to be allocated. At the same time, the end results are also as useful in terms of planning for landscape level interventions and monitoring over time. So thanks for sharing your experience from Mali, and good luck with the work. It was very interesting to see. We're running a little bit behind time, so we need to cut into our Q&A a little bit. So we'll do one question from the chat, and then we'll follow up with other questions in the Q&A in the follow-up email. And Arturo, it's going to be a question directed at you. I see there's quite a lot of questions coming in on terms of landscape size, on minimum number of indicators. Is there a specific question, Arturo, that you would like to speak to explain a little bit in a minute or so?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I'll try to capture a little bit of some. I answered a couple there, but I didn't have time to answer all of them in the chat. So about the size, I mean, the idea is that it captures like all of what's happening inside the landscape into one same ecosystem, all of the land uses. So yeah, I mean, in a really simplistic example, I mean, yeah, you may be monitoring at small scale, maybe down the river there is a factory that is doing polluting or something, so you're not taking that into consideration. So the idea is that's the reasoning behind the landscape approach, to be able to capture all of what's happening in there. So that's the reason that we believe that 10,000 hectares is a good indicator. Of course, this is flexible. So that's one. Maybe another question that I saw over here was around the indicators, livelihood indicators. So maybe for that one, yeah, of course, it's administrative level. So usually this kind of information is jurisdictional. And I think you're right, that's one of the challenges, I believe. And that's one of the key of defining the boundary. A lot of the times the boundary is defined by jurisdiction, by that same way. I mean, we take care that it also makes sense with the watershed approach. But yeah, definitely picking it by jurisdiction makes it easier to get this kind of information and to pair with with environmental indicators. Let's see if I can pick another one here.
I think we need to leave it at that, Arturo.
Okay, no worries.
I do want to give back to Alexandra to allow her to do wrap up. Yeah, thanks so much for that. And as said, we will follow up with the Q&A written out in an email. So another good question coming in terms of emission reductions and monitoring that. So we'll definitely capture that as well. So thanks everyone for joining this and for being so active in the chat. And over to you, Alexandra.
Thank you very much, Niels, and thank you for all those insightful interventions, John, Arturo, and Maimuna. So as mentioned in the chat box, we will follow up with an email after this session, and you will receive the presentation, different links, and resources. And we'll also address the questions that were unanswered during the session. Yeah, despite that we only had 1 hour together, I hope you will leave this webinar and you will feel that you have more familiarity with this excellent tool with LandScale. And I also wanted to mention that if you have 2 or 3 minutes, we will post in the chat box a link to a feedback survey. So this is for lessons learned and just to check your interest about upcoming events which could tackle the subject of landscape monitoring tools. We'll send that over the email as well. And I also wanted to remind all of you that in 2 weeks we have 2 other sessions that will be organized as part of the FOLUR impact program. And this time we will be introducing you and presenting a farmer support system toolkit that was developed by UNDP. So if you are already a member of the Food and Agricultural Commodity Systems community, you should have the invites in your Outlook calendar, and you can also see them on the digital platform. And if you're not yet a member, we encourage you to join us. And Federica will post the link to the digital platform in the chat box. So with this, I want to thank you all for joining us today. Again, thank you for all the speakers. Thank you to CI. It's not the last time that we're gonna have a joint event through the community, and probably we'll have another one later in the year. So please stay tuned. Have an excellent rest of your day, evening, or morning, and hope to see you in 2 weeks. Thank you.